All right, well, welcome back, everyone, and welcome, Dr. Guy McPherson. Hello, good to see you. Um, as I mentioned during this morning, during my address this morning, our goal for the 2020 WAISC event was to bring the subject of climate change to the front and center of the conference. And we've applied that same goal to this year's event. And to help us do that, we have Dr. Guy McPherson joining us for our lunch plenary talk. Dr. McPherson is an internationally recognized speaker, an award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. He is Professor Emeritus at the University of Arizona, and today he joins us to give a talk entitled Abrupt Irreversible Climate Change Underlies the Ongoing Mass Extinction Event. How do we respond? So I'll hand it over to you, Dr. McPherson, and you can take it away.
Thank you very much. I'll try to share the screen here. Okay, I wanted to open with a blank slide to give a short introduction. I'm going to talk about abrupt irreversible climate change, and there may be one exception to the reversible nature of climate change. Although the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, one of the world's more conservative scientific sources, has indicated that as a result of heating of the oceans in their special report on the cryosphere and the oceans, September 2019, they concluded that climate change was irreversible. Ongoing abrupt climate change is characterized by higher temperatures than we've ever observed in the record so far. In fact, the global average mean temperature of Earth is now higher than at any other time with Homo sapiens present. We are experiencing more droughts, changing rain and snow patterns, wilder weather, and complete list that you can see there on the screen, plus fires, volcanism, and earthquakes. And those are all related and a result of abrupt climate change. We have been in the midst of a mass extinction event, as even the mainstream media admitted in August of 2010. This too, based on a report from the United Nations, in this case, the Environment Program, that came out in August of 2010. And this event underlies the ongoing mass extinction event. Finally, the peer-reviewed literature admitted that we were in the midst of a mass extinction event in June 2015. Lead author Gerardo Ceballos indicated in an interview coincident with the release of the paper that life would take many millions of years to recover, and our species itself would likely disappear early on. In short, I'm stunned we made it this long. How do we respond? Well, most of us throughout our lives, this certainly applies to me, respond in a manner consistent with these two cartoons. The one on the left, we use the expectations of others to reinforce the bars on our own cage. My friend Tim Bennett refers to industrial civilization as having us born into captivity. Born into the captivity of a set of living arrangements that we didn't have any control over. It was just ongoing when we showed up. In continuing to adhere to the expectations of others, that merely reinforces the inability of most people to get out of their cage. I don't think very many people say, as they're on their deathbed, I should have bought more crap. And so this cartoon on the bottom right indicates something that might have us thinking in a different direction. Indeed, how do we respond to the information that we are given a terminal diagnosis, specifically at birth? Birth is a sexually transmitted disease that is proven fatal in every case so far. For thinking intelligent individuals, I would say that the to-do list intersects with their awareness of death to present what matters most, and therefore offers a path forward for people who are willing to recognize that death is always at the door. I'd like to show a short commercial at this point that illustrates the point quite clearly, I think. that we don't have very long lives. Sorry for the use of a commercial to make my point. And in my defense, I've never played or owned an Xbox device. This knowledge that we don't have long on the planet leads many of us to ask, why are we here? Why are we here, collectively and individually? Kurt Vonnegut quoted his son Mark after his son Mark was released from a mental institution, which Kurt Vonnegut referred to as a mental asylum. And before he received his medical degree from Harvard. Between those two, to the extent those are not the same thing, Kurt Vonnegut quoted his son Mark as saying, "We're here to help each other through this, whatever this is." And Kurt Vonnegut quoted an uncle that he didn't name to say, "We are here to fart around and don't let anybody tell you any different." I think those two actually intersect, maybe closer than most of us care to realize. The next obvious question is, why am I here? Why is each of us here individually? I'm here with you today, and I am here, I finally realized, on this planet because I'm a teacher. This is who I am. This is not merely what I do. And it took walking away from a tenured full professor job to make me realize that I'm actually a teacher and that this is what drives me. Case in point, Mary was a student in a conservation biology class in the fall of 2001. I met her for the first, and as it turns out, the last time so far, 18 years later on a beach in Florida. I had each of my students in my so-called science courses complete a significant piece of art or literature as a major part of their grade for the semester. Mary had moved several times. She had been married. She had significant disruptions in her life. And yet 18 years later, she had retained her significant piece of art or literature that she prepared in my conservation biology class those 18 years earlier, because this was something that mattered to her. It, according to her, changed her life for the positive. And this is just an indication of the importance of my educational endeavors, which I continue to pursue now more than a dozen years after leaving active service at the University of Arizona. The causes and consequences of abrupt climate change have been presented in considerable detail at my website, guymcpherson.com, including those I've already mentioned and a whole bunch more. So I would encourage you, if you're interested in a synthesis, collation of the peer-reviewed literature, to take a look at guymcpherson.com sometime in your spare time. Earth is already losing habitat for human animals. According to a paper by Colin Raymond and colleagues published May 8th, 2020, the emergence of heat and humidity too severe for human tolerance has already occurred. It's already underway in tropical and subtropical regions around the planet. During an interview at the time, the lead author, Colin Raymond, indicates that we didn't expect this to happen for a while, decades, in fact, but we're already there. We're in the midst of losing habitat for human animals throughout the world. An important attribute of ongoing climate change is its abruptness. Most of us are unfamiliar with the exponential function, and certainly with respect to how it impacts our lives. So this short video is a wonderful little example of the exponential function and how rapidly things can play out.
Everybody knows about playing with dominoes, but what you may not know is that a domino can knock over another domino, which is about 1.5 times larger. So what I have here is a chain of dominoes. Each one is 1.5 times larger than the previous one. And the smallest domino is about 5 millimeters high and 1 millimeter thick. And I will carefully place it. And there are 13 dominoes. And the largest domino, it weighs about 100 pounds and is more than 1 meter tall. Ready? Boom. That was 13 dominoes. If I had 29 dominoes, the last domino would be as tall as the Empire State Building.
That's an amazing little demonstration. The question again arises, how do we respond? And so far as a society, as a species, we have not responded particularly well to the events that have influenced our lives and our run as a species. As pointed out here, in the very end, civilizations perish because they listen to their politicians and not to their poets. And I would argue that that has long been the case. This is one of the reasons I had the students in my science courses complete a significant piece of art or literature as part of as among the exercises that they did during my courses. I think we need to recognize that mistakes have been made, and then we also need to recognize that we were born into captivity, so those mistakes are not necessarily ours as individuals. Perhaps the worst mistake we ever made as a species, some 315,000 years into our run as Homo sapiens, is to start storing grains. It seemed like a brilliant idea at the time, but storing of grains, after all, does allow us to get through the, quote, hard times. Grains are relatively easy to store, and they give us food during those difficult times for us and our families. Seemed like a great idea. We've also disrupted patterns of livestock grazing throughout most of North America, and in fact, throughout the industrialized world. We have also disrupted fire regimes throughout the world so far. We have created mass transportation, again, which seems like a great idea at the time, especially when we're the ones taking the mass transportation. And we have created these enormous silos. And the silo effect is perhaps nowhere more obvious than on college campuses, where people rarely interact among their different silos. I was housed within the School of Natural Resources at the University of Arizona for my entire career. I became the first person to ever hold a joint appointment in the School of Natural Resources in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. These are disciplines that are pretty close to each other, and yet it was long into the run of both departments before they had an individual who had a joint appointment in the two. If the situation is hopeless, and I think it probably is, then as American writer Edward Abbey points out, there's nothing to worry about. Edward Abbey did not propose doing nothing, and neither do I. In fact, Abbey pointed out that action is the antidote to despair, repeatedly in his presentations and his writings. As Stephen Jenkinson, who describes himself as a member of the death trade, as he points out, the great enemy of grief is hope. Hope is the four-letter word, the terrible four-letter word. The current situation requires us to be hope-free, to burn through the false choice of hopeful and hopeless, the two sides of the same con job. And he proposes grief as a requirement to proceed. And I agree. After all, hope is to cherish a desire with anticipation, to want something to happen or to be true. That's what hope is. It's wishful thinking. And I don't think that's very useful with respect to how we act as individuals, communities, or societies. Similarly to wishing for a different future, the Grief Recovery Institute defines grief as wishing for a different past. Well, that's pretty tough to come across. In the absence of a time machine, it's very difficult to realize that past that we wish for. I have for many years proposed planetary hospice as a route forward in light of the fact that we are in the midst of a mass extinction event that will almost certainly remove our species from the planet in the not too distant future. At the level of individuals, I have proposed that we treat everyone as we treat our beloved elderly grandmother, that we treat them with respect and with complete honesty. After all, isn't that how you would treat your grandmother? I would hope so. I would think so. At the level of community, I have proposed addressing racism, misogyny, homelessness, and other community level challenges by becoming an integral part of our own community, by participating as individuals within a community to try to make the situation better and more just for everybody within that community. And finally, at the level of society, I have proposed decommissioning nuclear power plants instead of leaving the ultimate mess in our wake. And also in an example demonstrating that I might be wrong about the irreversibility of climate change, I have supported and encourage you to become familiar with and support the Mere Reflection framework at merereflection.com. The program is being headed in his spare time by an incredibly multi-talented engineer by the name of Dr. Ye Tao. And he has proposed some ingenious ideas to cool the planet, which he admits must be implemented with a lot of other steps before there is any potential for preserving habitat for our species and others on this most beautiful of planets. The question arises again, why are we here? And again, I point to Kurt Vonnegut quoting those two individuals, his son Mark and the unnamed uncle, as indicating potential paths forward. His recommendations, I think, are consistent with the way he wrote and spoke throughout his entire adult life. He delivered a commencement address late in his life in which he said, join the National Guard or the Marines and teach democracy. I'm kidding, as was his style. We are about to be attacked by Al-Qaeda. Obviously, this is a while ago. Wave flags if you have them. That always seems to scare them away. I'm kidding. And then he says, go into the arts. I'm not kidding. Because most people, if they said go into the arts after those previous two recommendations, they would think he was kidding. The arts, he points out that the arts are not a way to make a living. They're a very human, and I would say humane way of making life more bearable. This is one of the, inspired by Kurt Vonnegut, is one of the reasons that I ask my students to prepare significant pieces of art or literature as a major part of their grade in my so-called science courses. And by the way, the students uniformly hated it, and they hated me throughout the entire semester. Each semester, a few students would go to the department head and complain about the horrors I was putting them through. And they had signed up for a science course, after all, and this is what they get, a requirement to do an art project, they were uniformly outraged. And then on the last class meeting of the semester, I would have the students share all that they had created. I had people writing songs, getting bands together to play at this last meeting of the semester. I had beat poets arise from nowhere. I had people who wrote essays and read them to us. I had people who prepared quilts, which is no small undertaking in the course of a single semester, and so on. And these were absolutely beautiful acts, after which almost every student came up to me and said, this is the best exercise I've ever done in college. Everybody should be required to do this. I didn't remind them that they were complaining not that long ago and going to my department head and telling him or her terrible things about me. The question then, what shall we do? What is worth doing? From Homer in the Iliad some 2,800 years ago, any moment might be our last. Everything is more beautiful because we are doomed. You will never be lovelier than you are now. We will never be here again. In the lines immediately before this paragraph, Homer wrote that the gods envy us mortals because we are doomed, because we will never be here again. And because we are doomed and because we will never be here again, if we are wise, we live in this moment. We stop to smell the flowers. We appreciate the world around us, the cerulean sky, the color of the grass, the water as it ripples. Any moment might be our last. The gods are plagued to live forever. Nothing is more beautiful than them. They are not doomed. If they want to smell a rose, why would they smell this one? They have an infinity worth of roses ahead of them. So why bother? In fact, it is our mortality that makes us realize how precious life is for every single moment. For me, as I indicated before, I realized I was a teacher only after I walked away from a position that I was allowed to teach. Here I quote American transcendentalist philosopher Ralph Waldo Emerson in pointing out that the purpose of life is not to be happy, it is to be useful. To be useful, to have made some difference, that you have lived and lived well. And I think Mary would agree that I made a difference, at least in her life. And this is all we have, is one life at a time. One life at a time to influence the people around us. Along with my partner, I developed a workshop, the Only Love Remains workshop, which encourages people through exercises to identify what their purpose is here on planet Earth, and to live with urgency in accord with that purpose or the purposes which they have found for themselves. At GuyMcPherson.com, also known as Nature Bats Last, you can find in the About section these lines, which indicate that from my perspective, if I'm giving recommendations, I recommend living where you feel most alive and simultaneously where you feel most useful. And that usefulness comes obviously from Ralph Waldo Emerson and his transcendentalist approach. I recommend the pursuit of excellence. I recommend the pursuit of love. In fact, in light of the short time remaining in your life and my own, I recommend all of these more fully than you can possibly imagine, to the limits of this very restrictive culture and beyond. For you, for me, for us, for here, for now, because this is what we have. We have here, we have now. Live as though you're dying. The day draws near. I can't predict what day you'll die. Neither can you, unless you have some suicide mission in mind. And I don't think many of us do. But still, we know that our lives are short. When I was delivering a presentation or a series of presentations in Western Europe about 6 years ago, there was a woman who at the time was the oldest living human being. She was 117 years old. And when asked to reflect on those first 117 years of her life, she said, it seemed rather short. 117 years old. I don't think I'm going to make it. I think it will seem rather short. I think it will seem rather short for all of us, in fact. And so I would encourage you to live with that in mind. Thank you, everybody, and particularly thanks to the people who invited me to participate in this year's convention. I very much appreciate it. And with that, I think we might have time for a question or two.
All right, thank you, Dr. McPherson. Appreciate your coming to speak with us. And like he says, we do have some time for a question or two, so you can either raise your hand and we'll ask you to unmute, or you can ask it through the chat box. Adelheid, I see you have your hand up. Go ahead.
Hi, Mr. McPherson. I just wanted to know if you had any solutions to the silo effect that you were talking about at the university.
I wish I did. It seems to me that every department head and every dean I encountered was intent upon increasing the thickness of the walls of the silos. There was abundant talk to the contrary, but I never saw any actions that encouraged crossing over across the silo boundaries. And I think that's too bad. In fact, I taught a course in the Department of Ecology and Evolutionary Biology. That department did not pay me. I taught the course once, and the department head in my home department, the School of Natural Resources, now called the School of Natural Resources and the Environment, my department head said, you can't do that anymore. You can't teach a course over there. They don't pay you. And I thought I was providing a service, obviously, and providing a different perspective than ecology and evolutionary biology students might otherwise receive. It was an example of what every department head and every dean I've ever come across said they wanted to encourage, and that few ever did. Well, if there are no further questions, thank you all for participating, and thanks especially to Eric and Gabe for making this happen for me. I greatly appreciate the opportunity to interact with you folks. I've been listening most of the day.
I just want to say thank you personally for being here and giving your time today, Dr. McPherson. It's been great having you, and sorry you didn't get to make it to Dillingham last year, but we will be doing this again, and maybe we can get you up here next time.
That'd be great.
All right. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Great message.